When it comes to data, the faster you can turn this into this, the faster you can understand and use it all to make your business run better.
In Power BI, we can add colors to our table visuals to illustrate key trends by drawing the user's eye to important areas of analysis within our dashboards. Let's take the existing table we have on the screen and convert this into a matrix visual. We want to put the years as the column dimensions. And now we want to add the state as the row label. I'm going to use the filter pane to remove the blank states from our visual. And now we want to add color to our matrix for the year and state to point out areas of key growth. In the formatting options, we select the conditional formatting menu and we select to turn on the background color. And then we open up the advanced controls where we make this color palette diverging. If you look at the report theme used to add color to this Power BI file, blue was used as a low value and orange was used as a high value. We check the diverging box and we use the number as the center. I'm going to enter 0 and hit OK. Now what we see in the visual is the diverging color scale. This means that everything less than 0 is blue for the yearly population growth, and anything higher than 0 in those yearly population growths by state is going to be orange. We can now filter this visual down to show the top 10 states for population over the last 10 years. And we also filter down the year field to only show anything greater than or equal to 2010. Now we are digesting a visual that's much easier to read because we have 100 colors we are comparing against one another as opposed to 2,500. We can compare the growth rates between Florida and New York, for example, which shows that Florida shows consistent population growth year over year, while New York shows areas of population growth, but also many years of population decline. In Power BI, we have several options for showing population trends by region over time. In the Dashboard tab I already set up, we can compare what each chart does and how it best communicates or does not communicate the goals from viewing and analyzing the data. Each chart has the year on the x-axis, the population numbers on the y-axis, and segments the U.S. population into region, which is denoted by the legend colors. I also added a DAX measure that calculates the total U.S. population that filters over all the regions, so we count the total U.S. population rather than filtering it by region for each of the color segments. I then added this DAX measure as a tooltip to all the charts. The stacked bar option makes it easy to see the U.S. population totals and trends by region by year, but it is much harder to compare the region totals between each other in a given year and across the years. The area chart compares the total region populations by year directly to each other rather than stacking them. It can get hard to decipher the areas as the rankings switch, and it's also difficult to sometimes see the lines in the chart. We cannot see the total U.S. numbers in this chart, but if we scan over it, the tooltip gives us the total U.S. population for that year. The line chart makes it easier to see the lines than the area chart does, but it is again difficult to see the total US populations explicitly by looking at the chart. The line charts work best for numbers that may be fluctuating often or don't necessarily relate to one another. The ribbon chart shows both the US population totals and the regional numbers broken down into their rankings and proportions for each year. When the rankings change between the regions, as we see where the West grows in population and the Midwest decreases in its population growth, we see the rankings switch in the charts. We're not analyzing population data that fluctuates quite rapidly or sporadically, but rather grows consistently or, in some cases, does not grow. The ribbon chart is a good option for communicating this trend, but there's options or situations where other charts that we see on the screen or different formatting, such as stacking or directly comparing them as clusters, work better. Choosing the best graph to communicate your trends over time really depends on the situation, and understanding how they work helps us make those choices. Bar charts in Power BI allow us to compare numbers, and in our case, population numbers. The stacked bar chart we see already set up in the dashboard compares the most recent total population numbers in the US in 3 geographical layers for the region, state, and county levels, as we see over in the fields that are put into the axis section for the visual. Notice that they're set up with the region on top, followed by the state and the county layers. The color for the region also helps distinguish the different regions when we drill into the state and county layers. If we wanted to fit this visual into a narrow slot on our finished dashboard, if we give it a tight space, we see that the row labels become truncated, and we want to see the entire row label so we can understand or easily identify the category. To increase the size of this row label width, we change the maximum size in the y-axis menu. And we drag it until we can see the entire region name. Now expand the chart back out, and we're going to explore the options for labeling and drilling. We can add the labels to the bars for these regions directly in Power BI. We go to the formatting options and select the data labels to on from their off position. We can format the data labels to show in the thousands, for example, and we'll stick with the millions. And we can then remove the x-axis completely because we already labeled the total population for the most recent year directly on the bars. We select the radio button for the x-axis and turn it from on and click it to off. We don't need necessarily 2 sets of chart labels, and just having one set of labels is more efficient and it makes it easier for the user to ultimately read the finished dashboard. We can drill down into the levels of this visual by clicking on the drill down functionality and clicking on the South region. And we see how the southern states rank up to each other within their region. We can then go into the county level by clicking on, let's say, Texas. And we see the row labels for the South region, Texas, and then the county name. In some cases, these row labels, where we label how big the data bar is, we see that a million may not be the best way to reference those numbers as we go down into the most granular layer. So we could update this to show the actual number, or probably the thousands would be the best approach. Now, If we want to see all the US populations, we can drill back up to the top layer, and then we click on this diverging arrows symbol at the top, and this takes us into the state layers, and this shows the region that it's in by the label and the color, and then the state. And we can expand this out again to see the county level details. Bar charts are one of the most impactful ways to understand the magnitude of numbers, and we see the different dimensions and comparisons that go on for these three geographical layers in an impactful and easy to read manner. I think the important thing to keep in mind when comparing proportions in Power BI is that we are trying to get a high level look at trends rather than analyzing the data by the ranking or absolute values at a more granular level. In that case, we would be better using bar charts or line charts. I personally do not recommend using pie charts because they can be difficult to read and decipher the sections, especially when the pieces get small. Tree maps, like the one we see on the screen, are much easier to analyze by the rectangle size, even at a high level, as we see with our tree map that represents the proportion of destination states by migration numbers as smaller rectangles within a larger rectangle. We also see that the colors indicate whether or not those state destinations are the 5 most populous states or not. If we want to compare the percentage of each of these migration numbers by state grouping, the top 5 most populous states and the rest of the US states, the 100% stacked column chart shows these numbers over time. Notice that the bar height is the same every year because we're measuring proportions and not total numbers. And the percentage charts take out these total numbers as an element to the analysis. If we want to analyze the total proportions, we can use other charts like the normal bar chart. We can use other proportion charts that are custom visuals to help with our analysis. We imported this MECO chart from the Power BI Visual Store by searching for it in the marketplace. Let's see how to create a MECO chart. MECO is short for Marimekko, which is a Finnish design firm known for their geometric patterns and designs. We add the MECO chart to our Power BI dashboard. The MECO chart can be confusing to set up, but it is worth using and figuring out once you see the finished product. We are going to add the emigration numbers to the y-axis, and we also add this to the axis width, as we will see later. Now we add the year to the category, and now we see the total numbers broken up by the year, where the size of the bar within the MECO chart indicates the numbers for the migration numbers that year. We see that 2015, for example, is a year when fewer people moved between states. Now we can add the state population size bin as a series category. We can change the colors to match the rest of the charts. What this shows us, the finished product, is that in 2015, as an example, there were fewer people that migrated between the states, but there's a slightly larger proportion of those top 5 US populous states that were the destination state for those migrations. MECO charts are one of my favorite visuals to use because they subtly show us the dimensions and proportions of our data at the same time. Spark lines, invented by Edward Tufte, are several micro line charts grouped together that enable us to see data trends quickly between categories. The trick to creating spark lines is to remove most, if not all, the chart labels to push attention away from the detailed analysis and focus on the high-level trends. In Power BI, we can create sparklines manually as individual line charts for each category, such as states, but this process is time-consuming and somewhat clunky. Let's instead look for sparkline visuals that are custom visuals in the Power BI store. We select Import from Marketplace and search for sparklines. We select the OK Viz, that's the top visual, sparkline by OK Viz. And once it's successfully imported into Power BI, we can set it up. We select the visual. We first add the years to the chart on the axes. Then we add the population as the values. So this shows us the US population trends, but we want to see it by the metro areas. So we select the metro areas by GeoID lookup table, and we add that as a category. I'm going to remove any of the GeoIDs that do not have a metro area. We now see many sparklines that give us insight into the population trends on a much more granular basis. Notice that the report theme colors do not apply to this custom visual because it is a custom visual and report themes are not necessarily consistently applied for those. We go into the formatting and we're going to change the colors on the sparklines, the low point and the high point, to blue and orange to match the rest of our color scheme. We go to the points option menu. We select for the highest color option, let's select an orange. And for the lowest color point, let's select a blue. We can also add a label for the most recent population to each metro area in the formatting options. We're going to turn on the value label and display the last value, which will give us the most recent population. I think that adding the most recent population value to these sparklines is impactful because we can see that a steep trend is going to have a bigger impact on a larger population number as opposed to a smaller metro area. We can sort the sparklines so that we see the sparkline with the highest population first. And we want to sort this in descending order. So we see the New York metro area is the top, followed by LA, and some of these large US metropolitan areas are following right after those cities. The sparklines kind of look crammed in this view. I'm going to filter down the sparklines just for the state of California so you can get a better idea of what this looks like. And now we see a more close view of these metro areas, and we see there's more space between them, which makes it easier to read. We can also format the last value to show the entire number instead of shortening it to refer to thousands or millions to make it more consistent across the metro areas that we see in the list. And it also makes it a bit easier and more consistent to read. There we go. We see how sparklines can provide valuable insight to the trends in our data. In Power BI, we set up bins to show the population numbers in 100,000 increments. Putting the numbers in bins makes it much easier to classify them and analyze them as a result. We can create a histogram using a standard bar chart visual. We select to create a new stacked column chart. Then we add the population bin, which is the population range, as a dimension for the axis. Then we add the count of the GOID as the values, and we're going to show this as a distinct count to remove the duplicates that occur over the years. We see that most of the populations in the US, if you count in terms of counting the county itself, these counties, many of them, over 2,500 of them, contain fewer than 100,000 residents. There is a custom histogram in the Power BI store, but we see here that the bar chart, that's a standard visual, has a great impact on how we see these trends. How do these counts of the population stack up to the population as a whole? We can add the total population. In this case, I'm going to show the most recent year. I'm going to show these in the tooltip. When we look at the bin that shows us the counties with populations of less than 100,000, we see that the most recent population has just under 70 million US residents. This means that even though a majority of the US counties have fewer than 100,000 residents, this actually accounts for just about 20% of the total US population. So more people are living in these urban areas that account for fewer counties. We can then add the region to this same chart as the legend, and we're going to remove regions without the GOIDs. And we see the distribution of the county counts by the regions themselves. We see that the Northeast region, for example, has a different population distribution and county count than other regions, for example. Histograms provide valuable insight, especially in conjunction with other visuals, in analyzing population data like we are doing in this project.